welcome both. Welcome to your own office, David Davis and Caroline Flint, to David Davis's office. Two former ministers for Europe and two resignees. So you're a double resignee. But a few other things in
you used to be able to win the race the first time around. There weren't many. Now there are about 25. So
they come along.
It's become a bit boring now, hasn't
too
it,
fashionable
really?
now,
Yeah.
too fashionable.
Well, we might come back to that, but let's start with the new government policy on Brexit and what you make of it. And indeed, if you know truly what it is, this Plan B that Theresa May has unveiled. David?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, the backstop, clearly the House hated the backstop. I mean, it was defeated by the biggest majority in history, the proposal she came up with. And the backstop's got three things wrong with it. It affects the integrity of the kingdom by separating out Northern Ireland. It keeps us in the customs union for longer than we want to be. And it makes a decision on when we can leave subject to a European veto. All three things are unacceptable, and that's what she's got to get put right.
Yeah, but you tell me the things that you don't like. What is Plan B? What is it?
Plan B is to go back,
replaces
and propose an alternative policy for dealing with Northern. This all hinges on the Northern Ireland border. You know, keeping it an open border, keeping it an invisible border, if you like, keeping it not a hard border. And so she's got to go back with proposals on that.
So we don't know what they are.
Oh, no, I don't think, and quite right.
No, we're not far off the date of Brexit. It's not like there's any emergency.
But you shouldn't panic. It's at least 6 weeks yet. No, to be serious, I don't think the government, the House, should try and pin down every comma of what she does, because she's got to negotiate. And after all, the House can't. It's not like domestic policy, where the House could dictate and say this is wrong and we want something and amend it to something else. It's got to give her some leeway to do the negotiation. So that's reasonable enough.
Do you think you have a sense of the shape of what it is that she's pivoted to?
Well, David's absolutely right about the concern over Northern Ireland Republic, the backstop. On one level, not that I'm saying that isn't a difficult issue, and certainly there are some people who have raised the prospect of a hard border, sometimes I think over-dramatising that phrase because of their own motivations to stop Brexit at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it has to be resolved, but I think actually it pretty much probably can be. I mean, I had a look at just what was passing back and forth between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And it seems to me, from what I found out, I think 1% of the Republic's exports go to the north. Actually, most of it's 10 times that much comes to us. Yeah. And actually, in terms of what is going back and forth, is things like Guinness. Yeah. And I think Bombardier's got sites there, and that supply chains into that. And it seems to me, whilst I wouldn't want to underestimate these things have to be difficult, because everyone wants it to be difficult so they can work it out and have all the meetings to do that, I don't think with a will that can't be resolved in the transition period, technology, trusted traders and so forth. And I think that can be done. And I think what has happened over the last 24 hours, but in the lead up to the votes yesterday, I think there has been more reaching out from the Prime Minister, certainly to Labour colleagues on my side. I was a group of 8 Labour MPs that was very concerned about how we protect employment rights, environmental standards going forward. Clearly she's picked up the phone to trade union leaders, so it's not just about Parliament. I'd have liked to see more of that earlier on, but there's also been a little bit more discussion, I don't know if you're part of that, David, on the Tory backbenches between people like Nicky Morgan and others and Graham Brady in relation to the Brady Amendment last night. So we've got a little way to go, but I actually think there is, I feel, to be honest, more positive about us sorting this out than I have done for a couple of years now in terms of yesterday. But
we've got European leaders today turning around and saying, forget it. And they have been saying that once the ink is dry on the withdrawal agreement, that's it. It's locked in. And they don't seem to be up for a renegotiation. Jean-Claude Juncker just said it, Michel Barnier.
Well, I'm not surprised less than 24 hours after last night's votes that you're going to have some of that. But
they did warn us in advance as well.
Yes, and the other problem about some of this, and I don't know if David agrees, I mean, part of it was that the European Union has insisted, from what I understand, that the detail around customs arrangements and trade had to be sorted once we leave. We couldn't get that in front. I mean, sometimes you'd read it in the media here or by politicians. That was our choice. Actually, that was the EU's choice, because they weren't prepared to negotiate on those issues with someone who was already a member of the European Union. Otherwise, they'd have 27 others queuing up to do that. So they have set, if you like, the framework for this. I don't want to sort of underestimate that they've got a job to do, because they've got to hold 27 member states together at the end of all day. And
one of the reasons about they don't like opening these
And to be honest,
states.
whether it's Conservatives or Labour, there's a bit of wanting to have our cake and eat it, really, on all of this. And that can't just be the outcome here without them being...
I didn't think I'd hear you quoting Boris Johnson.
Well,
I'm teasing you.
no, but I mean, you know, it is true. I mean, it is a bit like we want this all changes, but we want these all the same. And so I have some sympathy for you know, the EU commissioners and the other 27. But also, we also know with the EU that, you know, when it comes to it, there will be political decisions made about how we get to the next stage. And actually, it's how we get to the next point in the transition that is fundamentally important for these issues around Northern Ireland Republic and customs and
don't
single
forget,
market.
it's a negotiation. In the phrase of my namesake, Mandy Rice Davis, they would say that, wouldn't they, at this stage?
I can see what you're saying, but they did say the negotiations are kind of over, and all they can do now is clarification.
You know, go back. You want to look at a high-stress European negotiation. Look at the Greek negotiation. They said, we're not going to change, we're not going to change. Then they did something.
I mean, I think, you know, at least where we are, and what might satisfy David might be not what would satisfy me in terms of this, and that's part of the conversation. But, you know, and who knows, 24 hours time it all may change, next week it may all change. I sort of feel post last night's votes, there is at least some conversation that I felt after what we had before Christmas, with the vote being delayed, the vote after Christmas, it was almost like we were getting into just a log jam, and there was nowhere out.
Loop,
there does seem to be, my sense is, some movement on your side with different people with different views talking and trying to find a way through this in a way that's, dare I say it, more meaningful than what's gone on before. Yeah. And on our side, I think, you know, there clearly has been some reaching out, and, you know, better late than never. I'm glad Jeremy Corbyn said he will sit down and talk with the Prime Minister, which he's apparently been doing this afternoon.
He's doing it as we speak.
And don't underestimate the time pressure as being important in that. I think one of the things that brought the Tory party together a bit on this was, you know, the prospect of the end of the exercise approaching. And I think the same thing will have the Europeans. Europeans are a bit tougher on it, and my hunch is that we won't see them moving much before March. But you know, I think
I was going to ask you about that, because this requires Theresa May in her new policy mode to show what you would consider, I guess, quite a lot of nerve and hold tight, and your whole party to hold tight.
And Parliament too.
We've got another vote in 2 weeks' time. Are you quite sure that Theresa May, you know, the Conservative Party, you know, the Parliament, you know, is going to hold tight to what you see as a workable strategy where you can terrify the European Union into doing something they've said they won't do?
Well, I'm not talking about terrifying. The whole strategy.
You probably are a bit, aren't you?
No. The whole, I wouldn't ever say that. The whole strategy is about what's best, trying to get what's best for both sides. But it will take some nerve. There's no doubt about that. But I think there was a point.
But is that nerve there?
Yeah. Well, I think.
Have you spotted it in the past?
Yes.
You did actually leave this government because you thought they were taking policy by dictation from Europe a bit.
Yeah, well, I didn't quite put it in those terms, but she's been very tough in the past. But the simple truth is here, something changed last week. You know, the government's proposal that she's been holding to and say it cannot change under any circumstances effectively for a couple of months was rejected by the biggest majority in our history.
And then she flipped around and adopted the policy of the people who tried to depose her in December. It's a hell of a reversal of fortune, isn't it?
I didn't try and depose her in December, and you know, this is a policy which I've been adhering to.
But you know what I mean. Most of the people.
But look, this is politics. This is Theresa's.
But not as we've ever known it.
Maybe not, but this is one of the biggest changes in the history of the modern history of the country.
Do you think she'll stick to the new Plan B?
Well, I don't know how many other plans are in play, to be honest.
Well, the other one, there was a brief one reaching out to Jeremy Corbyn and the other parties, which could have meant permanent customs in.
No, but you see,
things.
I don't think that it's mutually exclusive to, at the same time as trying to resolve, you know, clearly major. I mean, we're all concerned, I think, across Parliament, to be honest, about the situation between Northern Ireland and the Republic.
Yes, of course.
I mean, we might have different ideas about how to deal with it. I think we're all concerned about that, what it means for the union and everything else. And the other point I would say, as well, Gary, is I believe as we go into the transition phase, where the implementation period, that will see a different approach to involving Her Majesty's opposition in more involved, inclusive discussions about some of the details of those trade and security areas. Because I think on a lot of areas where the sort of issues they'll be discussing about exchange of information on security, trade and what have you. I mean, our policy, we want close access to the single market, we want an end to freedom of movement. That is still Labour Party policy. Yeah. There is some common ground, but actually involving us a bit more to meet with officials, see the briefings, I think would be a step change away from what we've had over the last 2 years.
So where do you think we will be in 2 weeks' time, Caroline? She's coming back to the House then, she said.
Well, I mean,
she won't have much to show for it, will she?
Well, I don't think we can expect a huge amount, but what it is I think there's about what's going to be the tone over the next few weeks, what actual things of engagement will happen. We'll obviously be having to respond to what the European Union's saying. I don't know what's set up in terms of more meetings in that span of time as well. But I mean, clearly what I hope is that in some respects, I'm someone where I differ with David, is I don't want us to leave without a deal. I want us to get a deal. And then there are some on my own side who clearly just don't want us to leave at all. And I'm just hoping out of, the debates we've had over this week, that the sort of sense that there is a real attempt now to allow those voices that haven't been heard as much as they should be about trying to get a decent deal, but except we're leaving the European Union, will get more volume than they have had. And I think if she can work with that, and I think what is really the will of Parliament to see that sort of outcome is something that we can actually sort of see being built on over the next 2 weeks. I'm not suggesting the next 2 weeks it's all going to be over, because there's plenty of things that could throw a spanner in the works along the way. But I feel at least that we've got something that is more positive than what we've had before coming out of the debate.
There's no doubt that's true. I mean, there's much more of an air of optimism about the House in general, I think.
Well, I just bumped into one former minister who served with you, and they said, actually, I think there's now a 95% chance of crashing out, their phrase, I know you don't like it, with no deal.
I don't think that's...
I don't think it's true either. I mean, look, it's still possible. I mean, let's be clear. I mean,
what percentage would you put on it?
Oh, you can't do that. I mean, this is like saying what percentage you put on this move in a chess game. I mean, the truth is, I would prefer a deal. Let's be clear about that. And I do not view no deal as a sort of halcyon option that one or two of my colleagues do. I mean,
but it doesn't keep you awake at night. You
no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I think it's manageable if it has to be. But I think the prospect of it is going to bring both sides together, just as we've seen a crystallisation.
There isn't time to do. You just talked about a really big rethink
yes, there is.
Of the deal, and some people will say, "How on earth is there time between now and the end of March to construct something?"
You'll be astonished how fast these things can move.
But I don't think it's...
I think I would be after the last few months.
I mean, yes. My sort of feeling on this isn't, and this is why I didn't support the Cooper Amendment or the Reeves Amendment to extend Article 50. Yeah. Whatever the motivations of the individual sponsoring that amendment, what was worrying me was the number of people who I know damn well just want to basically overturn Brexit.
Yeah.
If we had a situation whereby over the next few weeks, 4 weeks, some developments were happening that show we were finding some way through this, I'm not dogmatic to suggest, oh, well, in that circumstance, if we needed to have an extension of a week or whatever it might be, a couple of weeks, to get that nailed, that I would oppose that. The problem is when people have tried to use parliamentary procedures to kick out, the ballpark, a date, which just leaves a vacuum in which nobody's addressing the real issue. And the thing about the no deal situation, and take no deal off the table and everything else, I supported Jack Dromey and Caroline Spellman amendment last night.
Which was in opposition to exiting with no deal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it was saying we do not want to exit with no deal. But at the same time, if you support that, you have a responsibility to engage on how we stop that happening by trying to secure a deal. And that's what sometimes has been missing from some people on the very Brexit side and some people on the very Remain side in Parliament. And to be honest, I don't know about your constituency, David, but I mean, I was in Peterborough knocking on doors on Sunday, out in my own constituency. More than anything else, the public, whether they voted Leave or Remain, say, for God's sake, get on with it.
Get it done.
Get your act together in Parliament and government and sort this out.
So just do it with a real word in the middle.
And then can you envisage, could you support a delay?
No, look, I think the sequence of what happens is important here. Caroline's right. There are people who want delay for its own sake, so the delay, and hope we'll stop it altogether. If we engage on proper negotiation, which we haven't yet, and it may well be that in 2 weeks' time we still haven't got any movement in the European Union, and the Prime Minister said, I want time to go back. But at some point, they'll re-engage. Once they've re-engaged, if we need another week or we need another 2 weeks, then okay, let's look at that. But it's the very imminence of the end point at the moment that's bringing people together, and I think we shouldn't move that.
She might be going out there, but I'm not sure they're coming together. I mean, Europe is standing there saying no. I know you would say it's only 24 hours, but they would say we've been saying no for months.
It's the famous European thing. They go right to the wire all the time. Sometimes the last week, sometimes the last day, sometimes the last hour. Sometimes they do, and your viewers won't be aware of this. They do what they call stop the clock. You know, they get to the end and say we're going to pretend it's midnight for the next few days until we've sorted this out.
Some people would also wonder whether, for someone more like David than Caroline, who doesn't get kept awake at night by the idea of no deal, that it's win-win for you. You send the Prime Minister off on what might be mission impossible to negotiate the thing that Europe said they'd never sign up to, and you can sit there comfortably saying, oh, I'll have another go, and keep sending her out, knowing that the clock is ticking down to the date at the end of March. When you get your Brexit anyway, deal or no deal?
No. I mean, bear in mind, I was in the system up until 6 months ago or thereabouts, and had we been on this tack where we are today, I'd probably still be in the system. It was only the attempt to deliver the wrong sort of Brexit that made me leave. So no, of course, you have to deal with some risks in this. There's no such thing as a risk-free negotiation, but the vast probability, in my view, is that everybody actually wants a deal, and as a result, everybody will actually deliver a deal. And there'll be some rough corners because it's late now, because it's taken a lot of time. But nevertheless, it will be delivered.
You're quite sure, Caroline, that the people who are relaxed about no deal haven't sort of hijacked this project and aren't sending the Prime Minister on a futile mission?
Well, look, I'm still wary of some of the MPs in Parliament who do feel that actually somehow we can manage a no-deal situation. I mean, I think you said, sorry, like if there's a no deal, we'll manage it in the transition. Well, there won't really be a transition,
no, there won't be a transition.
because it just won't be there.
Slip of the tongue.
And then I heard, I can't remember if it was Nadine or something that said, oh, well, we can have a managed no deal. I thought, well, that's a bit like wanting this transition. Yeah. So the thing is, I think, the idea that there are no consequences to this are really worrying. And I mean, I sit on the Public Accounts Committee. We've been looking at HMRC preparation, DEFRA preparation and all this sort of thing. And undoubtedly, we've got across the civil service people trying to do the day job and plan for this and plan for different eventualities. I mean, it's, I do feel for them, to be honest. And then a lot of talent being taken out of departments into the Brexit department to work there to support all of that. I am, very concerned about the idea that we can be cavalier about that. But I really believe that there is a majority in Parliament. What I was worried about, I have to say, is that even though I know there's a majority of the Parliament who don't want us to crash out with no deal, that by default we could end up with no deal because of all the shenanigans that have been going on. But the other thing is as well is that there has to be some sort of compromise here, and just a bit of grown-upness about the transition period, because we said earlier, and I think we were in agreement, a huge amount of detail about customs and trade is going to have to be sorted out once we get beyond the 29th of March. The frenzy that's going on now is, particularly on the Remain side of people who want a second referendum, is they're in a frenzy because they can see that 29th of March and the curtain coming down because we will have left. And then we'll be in a different situation as well because we'll be negotiating against people who aren't in the European Union anymore. But there is a lot to play for in that particular period, because then we'll have a series of not just one deal, but many deals to sort out.
10 work streams have been talked about, obviously the biggest being trade, but the others.
So a lot of this can only be really discussed in the detail, but part of it is what can we now, either whether it's through the withdrawal agreement, the political declaration, you mentioned a sort of letter of comfort or something else that is meaningful to people, to feel that some of their genuine concerns are being met and will continue to be honoured when we get into transition.
Yeah, I mean, one of the difficulties and one of the problems about the existing withdrawal agreement is there's no conditionality on the outcome. And Europe gets its deal on citizens. Actually, we both get the deal on citizens. It suits both of us. Europe gets the money, Europe gets various other arrangements, and yet there's no more than a fairly loose promise of what happens in the future. I think that's quite important too. I mean, I don't expect the Prime Minister to nail that down before March 29th. That won't happen. But what I think could happen is a lot more clarity about everything from employment law and environment law through to issues of access, how much inspection there should be and so on.
But you wanted to extricate us from what you see as the straitjacket of the backstop that's in there, which locks us into something a lot like the customs union and probably other bits of the regulatory regime as well. And that is a world away from what Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour leadership are talking about. Someone ends up disappointed in this whole process.
Not necessarily. I mean, bear in mind, Labour voted en bloc against the initial deal. I mean, and for good reason. I mean, as they said, some of these things we shouldn't be countenancing. Effectively, a division inside the United Kingdom for a start. So a whole series of things there. Then we're never going to have a circumstance where every single member of the House of Commons agrees with the right outcome here. But what we do have is more and more of a coalescence about what is the central strategy. But it's not just us. The other side of the channel, there's lots and lots of work going on. You keep hearing it, snippets here and there. The Portuguese suddenly saying, actually, we're not going to create problems for you coming as tourists to our country. We're going to have a special line for citizens of the UK, for Brits.
At the airport.
At the airport, so you're not going to be delayed. We've got the Port of Calais making it absolutely plain as a pikestaff. They don't want problems to occur there.
Yes, I always wonder when people who've been hugely critical of Europe and its over-regulation for years turn around and say, oh, they won't interfere, they'll let these countries do their own thing. And yet your entire main argument for years has been, no, they won't.
They won't.
They'll stop Calais doing that. They'll stop us doing whatever they like. I suppose it's one thing for one country to decide, trying to get all of them to decide on the same.
Because it's not just Calais, it's Calais and Zeebrugge and Rotterdam and so on. So you've got the Commission's going to have its work cut out to control them all.
Caroline, I want to ask you a bit about Labour and Brexit, because you stuck your neck out yesterday, and you probably got quite a lot of flack from it, I suspect. You voted, as you said, against the Yvette Cooper amendment. You were suspicious of the motives of people who wanted to extend the deadline.
I didn't think it solved anything, to be honest.
You thought it just potentially pushed back?
I just think it's...
This is the amendment that potentially delays the date of Brexit by months.
Potentially on the draft bill that Yvette produced, we were saying kicking it out to the 31st of December. And look, even before Yvette put together this amendment, I've been on the record of saying I don't believe in this extending Article 50.
You're suspicious of the motives?
I'm suspicious of a number of the people who signed that amendment who are absolutely blatantly honest. They want a second referendum and they want to stop us leaving the European Union. And it is clear that in the time we've got now, there's no way they're going to have that. No. If it was ever going to happen, and I don't think it is going to happen because I don't think there's a majority in Parliament for that, it would take months and months. But the other thing, just to sort of reality check here, we've got European elections coming up. I mean, and I've long said the idea that we would extend Article 50 and potentially either put in a situation where we'd have to take part in those European elections or stand by. I mean, someone said to me, the other week, said, "Oh, apparently they're talking about maybe we'll have to send MPs to Brussels, like the old, the way we used to do it, nominating people." I just think, all of that is a distraction. And to be honest, that's the problem with some of these amendments. It doesn't really deal with the substance. It's all about process.
And it's quite a threat. We'll send Nigel Farage back.
Yes. Well, that could be arranged.
How much flack do you get inside? We hear a lot about what's going on in the Conservative Party. How much flack do you get inside the Labour Party for the position you've taken?
Well, to be honest, not as much as maybe people think. I mean, look, social media, you get all sorts of things sent to you. There are organised groups out there from Best for Britain, People's Vote, and what have you, who and so I just. I don't spend my time obsessing about all of that, to be honest.
How much flack do you get
inside? Inside, what's interesting in the Parliamentary Labour Party, for different reasons, those of us MPs, and don't forget, although there were a number of us, I think 14 of us voted against the Cooper Amendment, there were other Labour MPs, I think 9 front benchers who abstained. And what we've got in the Parliamentary Labour Party are a number of colleagues, predominantly in Leave seats, who've basically made it very clear they do not support a second referendum and they really want us trying to work to get a deal. And they, like me, are concerned that attempts to extend Article 50 are just another way to stop Brexit. What I'm very pleased about in some respects, I don't want to be a rebel, to be honest. I'm very pleased that actually now we're their voices are being heard and their concerns, because we've had
There's
a
probably
very
even
well...
more of them than that, aren't there?
Oh, there's definitely more than that.
We
I mean, those are the only ones who felt last night compelled to
27
sort of show
last
them.
night who
Yeah.
abstained or voted against,
No,
including two
and if there was a
independents.
free vote, there'd be
Probably
more.
60?
Oh, I would have
More.
thought so, at least that.
Yeah.
Possibly
and
more.
look, remember...
Lots of Labour MPs have never said a word on Brexit because...
And they're on
for that
front
reason.
bench and they're not allowed to, and all of those sort of things. So
So if
and
I
they've
was
kept
Theresa May
quiet.
and I was looking around for a pool where I could fish, because there might be an irreducible core of Tory rebel dissidents who'd never support a deal, you think there's a potential, real
look,
potential on the Labour benches, in the right circumstances, however close we are to the deadline, that they could backfill, as it were, the
Well, look, I
Tory
think
rebellion.
there are some Labour MPs who, if there was a right deal, and I said this before, when we had the vote on the deal after Christmas, which I did vote against because, quite frankly, there were so many on your side voting against it. I thought, well, you know, what am I going to do here? Expend my vote on this? It's going down anyway. But I think if there was movement on, as I say, some of us have been lobbying around employment rights, environmental standards, and on the backstop. And if there was an indication of a different tone the government are going to approach in the transition phase, all things being equal, I would certainly consider voting for a deal like that. But I really think, and as I say, you know, there's responsibilities on both sides. The Labour Party, our leader, Keir Starmer, also, I believe, have to engage. And because when I looked at the withdrawal agreement, you know, when it first came out, and then I looked at the Parliamentary Labour Party briefing about the withdrawal agreement, funnily enough, there was quite a lot of it they agreed with. And they thought wasn't half banned on EU nationals and so forth. So I don't think we're a world away, but we need to start having the conversation. And therefore, I still feel that Jeremy Corbyn has said, you know, if there's a reasonable deal and it deals with some of these areas that we have concerns about, then we're open to that conversation. I don't think that necessarily that means it's going to meet all his demands, but this is something where we're going to have compromise, but at least we need to have a conversation.
And to be fair, that's been apparent from the beginning. I mean, Keir Starmer, I nominated him to become a Privy Councillor precisely so we could brief him properly. You know, now, of course, with all the tensions inside the party, I wasn't going to embarrass him and say, well, come up with alternative proposals, but maybe that will come now.
Maybe you should have done.
No, I think, you know, sometimes you've got to
Maybe
be
you should have done.
fair to your opponents.
I want to try and pin you down on what might happen in a second meaningful vote.
Yeah.
Let's say Theresa May comes back and it's not what some of your colleagues want. The treaty itself has not been changed. There are legal codicils that some of them that basically say this backstop isn't forever; it's temporary. But it just doesn't do it for everybody. What sort of number? You think the rebellion comes down to a size of defeat comes down to a number beginning with 100 and something rather than 200, but it's still mighty.
No, I think if what she comes back with is cosmetic, and I suspect there will be an attempt by the opinion to sort of give us something cosmetic, and people judge it to be cosmetic, then it will be a big number. It'll be a number. It'll be 100 or something. It'll be a large defeat. So it won't be down whether it's a codicil or this or the other. It's whether we get the correction of the three big things I talked about in the beginning. You know, the constitutional issue, the customs union issue, the negotiating leverage issue. We'll resolve those three things. She'll get it through the House, I think.
Well, I hope there's going to be more thought into thinking about what you present and what you bring back. Because there's no point us going through the debacle we've had before of, you know, coming back with something, delaying a vote and all of that. I mean, that's no good, because at the end of the day, we've got to then actually sort of do the legislation.
Yeah. But I would just say one thing in this. I mean, you know, we want to be a bit wary of putting artificial deadlines on ourselves. I mean, mid-February, I would be very surprised if we have a resolution by then. It's going to be probably a month later than that. But you know, we've got to go on principle, and Caroline's right. We're also going to go on what we're aiming for. What's the big picture at the end? Because that's what people voted on. They voted with a view of their own country, and we've got to deliver on that.
A lot of people think that actually Jeremy Corbyn's dream solution to Brexit would have been a general election, but he's not going to get that by the look of it. Is that people like you slip the leash, go off and help the deal over the line. He can wag his finger at you, hold up his clean hands and say, I had nothing to do with that.
I think I did hear some rumours.
Do you suspect that is actually...
Well, not from Jeremy, but I did hear some feedback from apparently some frontbenchers who, before Christmas, thought it would be tighter and thought some of us would help it over the line, and Thank God for that. I heard that. I have to be honest. I heard that secondhand from someone else, but. In the great world of politics, I wouldn't be surprised.
Possible.
And then of course, when it didn't happen, then you have to start reconfiguring.
But if it did happen, he'd then sort of wag his finger and maybe even sort of encourage associations to turn on you.
Look, to be honest, in my own constituency, my membership is, probably like lots of places, most of them voted Remain. Not all of them, but actually they're very pragmatic Remainers, I would say, for the most part. They get it. In some of my strongest Labour wards, something like 85% voted Leave in parts of those wards. And, certainly when it was the 2016 referendum, and I was out campaigning, I can't say there was a huge swell of people wanting to knock on doors, I have to say, and we didn't get much help in the seats from Don Valley from the Labour Party nationally, that's for sure. But we always try to keep good relationships with our Labour voters who were voting Leave if I was voting Remain. And that's because part of being an MP is more than on this issue, it's a whole number of other support I give, but also a whole number of other policy areas in which there is not a disagreement between me and my constituents, or for that matter, my party members. And I've just tried to be, as far as I can, I've just tried to be honest and consistent in my approach. And I go back to what I said after the referendum, and more importantly, what I said in the general election in 2017. And people say to me, oh, you're running scared of your Leave voters. Well, I can honestly say to people, I've had conversations with Leave voters who said, let's just go without a deal. And I spent a considerable amount of time trying to say that is not the answer here, whilst at the same time saying to some of my Remain voters and members, the breakdown of trust in politics, if we try to turn this over by a second referendum, will be hard to repair.
Would be spectacular.
And 6 out of 10 Labour seats are in Leave seats. I think something like a huge amount of the Tory marginals we're hoping to win in a general election when it comes around are also Leave seats.
I think pretty much
there is a reality here in terms of the public and where they are, and then it goes to the whole matter about concern about our towns and smaller communities feeling left behind, which is not all Europe's fault, but certainly feeling that when we talk about the benefits of the EU or the benefits of London, all this, they don't see themselves in that. And so I want to get to a point, and I think Jeremy absolutely is in the same place. I think there is part of it. We want to get beyond this so we can get to deal with some of those more pressing everyday issues of concerns in our communities, which we're not really dealing with because of where we are on trying to sort out how we leave the European Union.
And like Caroline, I wouldn't blame Corbyn for taking the stance you describe, but I do think that actually the public is pretty unimpressed by the sort of constructive ambiguity arguments that some Labour members want to run. I think they don't like it at all.
You're both going back to your constituencies this weekend with a slightly better mood, a skip in your step?
Much better. I wouldn't be skipping your step, it's a bit early for that, but much better mood. I think this has been a good outcome for the country. Forget the politics of it for a second. Country wants us to leave. Country wants us to get on with it. But country wants a decent outcome too. And I think all of those look more probable this week than they did
within the timescale that is laid down by the end of March. People will be
it won't all be concluded by the end of March, but it's possible to get it done. That's the point.
I feel comfortable in my decisions this week. I supported the Labour amendment. I supported the Jack Dromey Caroline Spellman amendment to take no deal off the table. But I am comfortable with how I voted in rejecting some of the other amendments because I think it's absolutely consistent with what I've promised my electorate all the way through. I go back to Doncaster this week, happy about the fact that I've heard more this week about how the Prime Minister is going to engage with trade unions and others around the employment rights agenda. I feel pleased, we wait to hear the outcome, we won't have that before we finish this podcast, about the meeting with Jeremy Corbyn, however that's gone. I hope it's the start of a conversation. People do want us, I think whether they're in Doncaster or Darlington or Dartford, they want us to try and sort this out.
We are talking about two people in a room, both of whom are rather famous for sitting silently. And you've probably both experienced that with Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, so I doubt that's moved things on. But you've helped us with your thoughts, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you for welcoming us to your office in Hogwarts.
At the top of the 39 steps.
And thank you again.
Thank you.
Very nice to talk to you.
Our pleasure.